Let's see. Okay.
Hi,
Hi.
Omer.
Let's see if I can hold on. Speaker, MacBook Pro speakers.
I can
Test
hear
test.
you good.
Me?
I can hear you. Yeah,
Cool. How's my sound?
you sound great.
Is this video and audio?
I'll use video as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah.
How's it
Thanks
going?
for. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Where are you at? I like your setup.
Thank you. I'm in your old neighborhood.
My
Uh,
old neighborhood.
Can do you
Okay.
rec do you recognize the name?
Pacino?
Yeah.
How'd you know that?
How did I know what?
Does it say Pacino there?
Yeah.
How did you know that? That's pretty impressive.
I read your book.
But does it say Pacino in the book?
It doesn't, but you talk Parkway Mall. You talk, I think, one of the restaurants down the street, and I go, he used to live here.
But Kareem, you know what's trippy about that?
Tell me.
The basement that we lived in was on Pacino. Like that was the street that it was in. Our bungalow was on Crocus, and then we moved to the basement, as I said in the book, and it was on Pacino Boulevard. It was on Pacino.
Like your address was Pacino.
Yes.
Oh my god. So were you okay? How close were you to the school?
Terraview Willowfield,
Yeah.
7 minute walk, 8 minute walk.
Okay, so you were
Ellesmere and Warden.
yeah, you're oh, so you were on that side. Okay. So
No, no,
you
we grew. I was born Scarborough General, and then we lived on Crocus Drive on
yeah,
Ellesmere and Warden.
yeah,
I
yeah.
was just there last week actually for this piece,
You're
and then
kidding
we
me.
moved when I was 12 to Pacino Boulevard on his basement, and that's on Pacino and Victoria Park.
Yes, yeah. You're on the yeah. So Pacino Victoria Park is that way. I mean, Victoria Park is that way. Pacino's like right in front of me. We're literally I'm at the corner of Pacino and Pharmacy on Pharmacy, right at
That's
the
amazing.
right at the bus stop. But I used to live in this house's basement.
uh, there it is.
Yeah, yeah. So when I so as I was reading the book, and I think it's probably somewhere near the beginning. You talk about your friend. You're on your bikes, and then you talk about Scartown, and then you mention one of the restaurants, or one of the stores, I think. And I go, oh my goodness. And I told my wife, I said, Minaz, Omer used to live around here somewhere.
I did, and the restaurant might be the Hakka Chinese China Cottage. It might have been that one.
My favorite.
So good.
It's changed names and owners now.
I just discovered that, and I was a little disappointed.
Yeah, it's not the same. It's the same people that work there, like at the restaurant. I don't know about in the kitchen, but I don't know. Maybe it's just in my head, but it doesn't taste the same. But
Okay,
I would talk about it all the time. But thank you so much, anyways, for
my pleasure.
yeah for joining me. Um, and congrats on the book, obviously.
Thank you. Thank you.
By the way, I want to ask you this question off the top, Omer. Um, why why did you decide that you wanted to write a memoir?
Because people wouldn't believe it if it wasn't a memoir. If I had tried to write this in fiction, in story, which I was doing when I was at Yale Law School, I was working on a novel and obviously these essays. But I felt that after Trump was elected, there was such a gap between how your average white person in the West thought of Muslims and brown people and what I thought. I thought the gap was just so wide where they were talking about like banning Muslims in the United States. And I was in New Haven at this point in 2016, whereas I'm talking about Muslims and brown people and immigrants being the best generation, the next generation, the ones who are going to uplift and inspire, that come from far places, our parents, grandparents, us. And I thought that gap was so wide that the only thing that I could do is really put my own story on the line, and then they use that story as a vehicle to discuss ideas. Because when I was writing
Yeah.
fiction, people could
Mm.
say, editors could say, and you have to understand most of the publishing industry is very, very white. So even
Yeah.
getting this book out in 10 days is a remarkable accomplishment for me, just in terms of being able to do it with my vision. But people wouldn't, many editors wouldn't believe what I was writing when it was fiction. So with the authority and credibility of nonfiction of a memoir, for me to say, no, this happened and this happened to me, and things like this happen to people like me,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone could question it. And then I just sort of ran with it, and it became a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, actually.
What was difficult about it? Was it just remembering,
Well,
all of these things that
memory,
you went through, or?
that's part of it though, because even your memory is subjective, right? Because
Yeah.
like after we have this conversation, you're gonna have one memory of this, and then maybe like 6 months later, that memory is overwritten by another memory, and then a year later, it's written over. So I was really trying to, drill down in my mind and think about what were the core events that would form into a memoir. And it's not like therapy, right? You're not just like
Mm.
just purging onto the page. You're constructing a story, and there has to be ideas in it. And sometimes when I was writing, for me, I go inward. So sometimes I did feel like I hit the vein, and then when I hit the vein and it hurts a little bit, then I feel like I've gotten somewhere and it's made me uncomfortable. And now the task then is, as a writer, to translate that onto the page in the best way that I can. And that translation of the feeling and the emotion, that's what I got better at in the process of writing it over 5 years.
Wow.
Right. So being able to translate, but both like the emotion and the music of the story. And it's not all pain and frustration and negative emotions. There's obviously moments of joy and laughter and gratitude and love in it as well. So I wanted to make sure it captured all these things, and I did my best job as a writer to translate it and also add something new. I didn't want this to be just a imitation or just like a second rate version of what someone else was going to do. I really wanted it to represent me, my voice, the authors that influenced me, and the towns and communities that it influenced me.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to, the, and when I talk about memory, maybe I should talk about like emotions, or you talked about it being therapeutic. Um, how I'm imagining it must have been difficult to to remember, back, for example, you're in Paris, you're in the attic, and you just can't leave, you just can't get out of bed. And it's not just a paragraph that you write, there's a few pages that you write, there's a chapter that you write about this. And having to go back and almost show yourself naked to the world that, this is who you are, and this is what you've experienced. Like, how were there times where you said, maybe I don't need to tell this part of the story, or this is not worth it? Did you ever experience thoughts of
Of
that?
course,
Yeah.
every day there's a lot of doubts, and there was questions of whether to include things. But when I was actually writing it, I try to be a pure writer. I try to just
Hmm.
put what's coming to me as an artist as well onto the page and to translate that. And I feel what I'm most suspicious of and worried of, and actually a little bit paranoid of, is that I'll start self-censoring or adjusting because of other
Hmm.
people's perceptions. So obviously later on in the writing and the revising process and the editing process, there's time to make changes and think about things, and other things as well to consider. But when it came down to writing, I wanted to be as honest and as raw as possible, and for it to really capture the feeling as well, because the book takes you into this world through my view, right? And you're kind of
Yeah.
seeing things. And for many people, that'll be familiar. And for some people, that'll be totally new. But either way, what I wasn't going to do was like BS people. What I wasn't going to do
Hmm.
was like downplay things that might have been worse, or exaggerate things, or do this. I really tried to hold myself accountable and maintain the artistic integrity of the book itself.
Yeah.
So sometimes that made me uncomfortable because there might be things in there that I might not want, but at the same time, my first duty I saw was to the truth and to readers and to this experience as well. And that's kind of what led me. So yeah, it was difficult at times for sure, but that difficulty helped serve the process and what I was doing, because I think good things are difficult anyways by definition.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I'll call them battles. There's a lot of battles in the book, mostly with yourself, and I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, but you talk about, and the battles come as you succeed, right? There's like, I'll give you an example of mine. There was a time not too long ago where travel was, forget it. Kareem is never going to be able to travel, and I've been fortunate enough, to be able to afford to travel recently. And when I find myself in another country, I go, wow, never in a million years would I ever thought I'd be able to, travel to Eastern Europe, for example. Um, and in your case, you find yourself in Israel, and you start the book off in Israel, um, and someone who would come from Scarborough, and what you had faced would find themselves in Israel, going, "Wow, who would have thought a kid, from the suburbs would have made it here?" And then there's a battle, a battle of not being accepted by anybody.
Hmm.
Um, and it's interesting how you end the book. Maybe we'll talk about that as well. But why did you want to start the book with that story?
I thought the story was very powerful in
Hmm.
the sense that, I mean, it impacted me. I
Yeah.
thought of it a lot and I found new layers. This would happen as well sometimes, like a memory that might like be repressed or dissolved. You find new layers to it and you're like, wow, there's something deeper there. In this case, it was very jarring because obviously I was in Israel without giving too much away, but in the interrogation room, and then there's this conversation, this get to know you session that happens for 3 or 4 hours, and that's where the book opens, and then
Yeah.
it cuts to Al Aqsa Masjid and being in the Dome of the Rock, and then having a almost an altercation there, and the contracts and juxtaposition of these two things of not quite belonging to me,
Yeah.
that summed up the essence of my story and the story that I wanted to tell. Because
Hmm.
you have to remember some of the other stories that come up when you're a Muslim kid, a brown kid. You're growing up, if you're born in the West, born in Canada, you're coming up in the culture of your parents. You're learning a
Yeah.
new culture, you're adjusting. So it's almost by definition, no matter what you become, you will not be them. So you will have to adjust and be able to exist in different worlds. I still do that,
Yeah.
right? Um, so it wasn't like I thought of whether to not open it there, but I thought it was also important because experience was real. It was very unique, and I
Yeah.
thought it was powerful and important. And I wasn't going to shy away from it just because it was in Israel or Jerusalem. You have to remember. I mean, Jerusalem itself is a very important city, but
Yeah.
because all these experiences are true, this is a memoir, a nonfiction book. That means that every experience resonates with a certain authority. I didn't just like invent this thing that happened, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a very it's and it doesn't just happen to me either. I mean, you can rest assured almost everything in this book didn't just happen to me, that we know people that have faced similar things that we all have. So yeah, it was more just about like that experience. I was at Yale Law School, was just doing well, like really learning a lot, and I found myself in Jerusalem and then in the interrogation room. So I was like, here we are, and I had I actually had Edward Said, the great Palestinian author's book, in my bag when I was in the interrogation room to
Oops.
detail. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. I had two books actually. One was by Edward Said, who was a Palestinian scholar, of course, the author of Orientalism, and the other was by Saul Bellow, who is a great
Okay.
Jewish author, right from Montreal. So I was reading Bellow originally, and then once they detained me, I put the Bellow down and I took out the Edward Said, basically.
Of course you did. Always looking for a battle. Of course. Of course.
Can
That's crazy.
I say
Uh,
something on the
yeah.
battle point though? Because
Yeah.
the battles are internal, right? It's
That's
like
right.
this thing
Yeah.
is happening in life, like a new step, a new adjustment has been made,
Yeah.
and you're moving up in life, and it's just different. So the internal battle is something that you're constantly facing, and society is making you face it as well.
Yeah.
So
Are you still battling?
yes, I would say so.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not like there's a story close to the end. You're in a I think you're in a cabin, and you've got, or you're at home, and you have all of your transcripts, your graduation certificates, and all of these awards, and you sort of look at them and go, what the heck's the use of all of these things? Um, you're not going to do the same thing with this book, are you?
No, I would not do the same thing with this book. But, I really had to reflect on what was the value of some of these credentials
Yeah.
You know, what was the value of them? Obviously, I wanted them. I worked hard for them. They're
Yeah.
very, very difficult to get. And, you know, I think like it's kind of difficult for me to explain or even talk about that scene unless people understand what comes before it. So I don't
Okay.
want to touch on that, but I'll just
Sure.
say
Sure.
that like as we grow older, we I definitely reflect on what was the value of the meritocracy of the credential. I mean, brown
Yeah.
parents obviously pushing kids towards excellence. In my case, I just felt like I kind of came out of nowhere and just like had this motivation and just charged for it. But I'm both proud of the credentials still, like to this
Yeah.
day, like I'm still glad about them. And at the same time, I've moved past them entirely. Like I don't wake up one day and being like, oh, I went to Yale. You know, it's more because it was, and by the way, the privilege was always about what do you do with it. It was
Yes.
never about
Okay.
for me to become like a rich investment banker and corporate lawyer and just disappear and get like a nice house. I mean, that was there, but I was just driven by something else, maybe because I had nothing to lose,
Yeah.
right? If you're like born super privileged and you have a lot more to lose. So I felt like I had nothing to lose and I really wanted to pursue my own thing. And that was this kind of foreign policy law writing thing. And um yeah, so
So in your story, in your memoir, there it almost is like a switch that goes off. And we talked about memory a little bit, so maybe this memory I've it switched with another story in your book. But you see Barack Obama, and
hmm.
I can't remember if it's when he gets elected or when he's giving a talk at the Democratic National Convention, the election before. But there's almost like a switch that goes off where you go from just another kid that I might walk by the streets here in Scarborough to Omer's going to do something with his life. And you just start devouring knowledge and reading like crazy. Was it literally a switch that went off for you?
Yeah, I mean, this is another thing where people are like, "Well, I don't believe that it happened that way." And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it is a cliche, but I'm sitting here talking to you right now with the vocabulary that I do, with
Yeah.
the credentials that I do, and with the book out, like telling you that
That's
that moment changed
amazing.
my life, you know? It's just
Yeah.
like maybe we get so caught up in like fake versions of that that when it actually happens, I mean, the configuration of events was so unique, right? 2007, the US was down in Iraq. We see Bush, Muslim communities always talking about Bush, Iraq, Afghanistan. And then I'm kind of aimless and frankly hopeless. And then just see this thing. And it was just like a shock, you know?
Yeah.
And look at the power of image and of an idea. The minute that it enters into your brain, when you see that and you think it, and what happened was two things, I think. It was first of all the visual of him, you know, if he was a white guy and he was exactly the same, it wouldn't have gone that far. But because
Interesting.
he was Barack Hussein Obama, because he was
Yeah.
just in his own lane and a unique figure, all of a sudden the visual triggers an idea, which is that I might be able to do this.
Yeah.
That's different than seeing like, you know, I don't know, Bill Clinton with someone with an inspiring story just on the screen as well.
Yeah.
So, and all of a sudden everything changes. So I am that kid walking down the street in Scarborough. The
Yeah.
only thing that's different now is that I've got a flame and a fire burning inside of me.
That's
And
amazing.
that's how it started. And it's
That's
still
a
going. I haven't
Yeah.
lost it. But that's the thing. I haven't lost it. I'm just as hungry to learn and read today
Yeah.
as I was in that moment.
And that's phenomenal. I remember years ago before he came on the before he was a Marvel superhero speaking with Simu Liu. Um and even back then when he was just on a CBC show, he talked about representation and he goes, it matters, it's important. I want to, get to the highest level so that, kids that look like me that don't see people like me on the big screens, you know, see me and then one day go, I'm going to do that too.
By the way, something else about him,
Yeah.
it wasn't seeing an entertainer. It wasn't seeing like the heroes that we had before were largely entertainers and athletes, right? Kobe
Okay.
Bryant, Vince Carter,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, and musicians. For the most part, people who were basically paid to entertain.
Sure.
And Obama was something different. He was running for president. There's nothing you can say about that. He's like running for president, right? He's there. You see him talking, and he was just so beyond excellent of what we had seen since that point. I mean, who would we seen at that point? Al Gore, George W. Bush, Bob Dole, Bill Clinton. I mean, with all due Ronald Reagan. I mean, with all due respect to them, for the most part, except for Bill Clinton, most of those dudes were very mediocre. And it was because of that they were white guys from power that they were able to, like, if Reagan was black, this should be like an SNL series if Reagan was black, because they just got away with so much flagrantly illegal shit. Okay, I was reading last night about how they the Reagan administration was funding the Iranian Ayatollahs. I mean, selling them weapons after the Iranian Revolution, right?
Yeah.
And just things like that. But Obama was embodied excellence. He spoke very well. He'd gone to Harvard Law School. He had a story of being from the outside, and that's what really resonated with me. And of course, like, just something about the name Hussein. Something about the
That's
name. There was just something about the
yeah.
name. There was just something about the name where I was like, damn. First of all, the name is very familiar because Barak in Urdu is Barkat, right? Which is blessing.
Yeah.
Hussein is a very, very common name among all Muslims,
Yeah.
Arabs, South Asians. And then Obama just sounded like just sounded like a unique kind of ethnic name to me. Like
Yeah.
could have been one of my friends' names, right? It was the radical familiarity of seeing someone who looked like me, but he was on TV on CNN talking about running for president. I think that just like made the
That's
sparks in my
amazing.
brain go off. So
That's just amazing. There's so many stories I would love to talk to you about, but I'm gonna recognize what time it is. So a couple of quick questions.
sure.
Um, Brown Boy is your first book.
Yeah.
What's your next book?
My next book is what I'm working on right now.
Okay.
Are you gonna Google it? You're not gonna find
I'm
anything.
not googling. No, no. I'm
Okay,
just
okay, cool.
yeah, 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 yeah.
No, my next book I'm working on is a historical project on the re-rise rather of fascism in the West. So it's a very different book than Brown Boy. I almost again don't want to talk about it too much,
Yeah, yeah.
but it is going to be a pretty comprehensive historical literary work that's going to be pretty fast paced, and I think will both start a lot of conversations as well as just end some conversations as well.
That's amazing. Um, there's a there's a scene in your book where I think it's during the pandemic, and you're maybe it's not, but you're in a bookstore, and you constantly go to this one bookstore, and maybe it's
Mhm.
in Paris. Maybe I'm getting my
It's in
stories mixed
Paris,
up.
a Shakespeare Company.
Yes, yes. And you go there and you feel, yes, this is right after this episode that we talked about earlier from the attic. Um, and you go there and you feel comfort there. And so I want to ask you, because I've never thought of a bookstore that way, the way you described it. I've only seen that sort of bookstore in movies. Um, what's your favorite bookstore? Is that your favorite bookstore?
I feel like it would be tough for me to answer this, and I would also get in trouble because I don't want to pick one bookstore over the other. But I'll give you some of my favorites. I like Shakespeare and Company,
Yeah,
obviously. Type Books and Queen. I mean, in Toronto, Toronto needs a better independent bookstore game, but
yeah.
for economic reasons. But McNally Jackson in New York and the Strand, obviously Porter Square Books, Harvard bookstore, the Coop. But I want to say for me, when I was growing up, like after I had my enlightenment moment, the bookstore was really both a safe space, a
Okay.
training ground, a place where, I mean, you think of what it is. It's just like the best books around you, and they're fresh and you can like take anything off. Actually, my favorite bookstore, I do have an answer for you because it
Okay.
no longer exists anymore.
Oh no.
It was the Chapters in Mississauga,
Oh wow.
Ontario. On what was it on? It was on Rathburn, and it was like it was right by where Sport Check is now, across the street from Square One, and then they
Okay.
moved it into Square One as an Indigo because our family's out there right now. That's where we live, right?
Okay.
But yeah, so that place closed down. I used to spend a lot of time there. I used to browse the bookstore. They used to have a 24-hour Starbucks, and I just miss some of those days where
Hmm.
I was just younger and learning a lot, walking through the bookstore and imagining, like, again, like maybe one day I'll write something, like maybe. But for now, I'm just so happy to be here and to learn.
That's
And
amazing.
now I'm talking to you with this guy coming out, in 10 days. So we're coming around full circle, and here we are. It's going to be exciting. We'll see what happens. I'm really proud of it. 10
It's
days and that's it. So
it's a great book. I really enjoyed reading it. What are you reading right now, Omar?
well, that's a good question. I'm reading a couple books. I'm reading this great book by Eric Foner called Reconstruction, which is about how you're finding me in Savannah, Georgia, by the way. Like, I'm in the deep south of the United States. I
Okay.
came out here for some sun and some research, but I'm
Nice.
re- I wanted to make sure my color matched my that's a joke that I can make between us only, right?
Absolutely,
Of
absolutely.
course.
I get
Of course.
it.
No, I'm reading Reconstruction right now by Eric Foner. It's a
Okay.
great book on just what happened after the Civil War and why the hope of rebuilding the South and freeing Black people failed at the time. I just read this great book on Juneteenth by
Oh,
Professor Annette Gordon Reed on the history of Juneteenth in Texas. I learned a lot about that. And I also got Mehdi Hassan's book on deck, Winning Every Argument. Mehdi Hassan just put out a book. But a lot of my reading right now, to tell you the truth, is very tailored towards my project on fascism. So I've been reading a
yeah.
lot about Nazi Germany, Confederate States of America, Italian fascism, light reading that most people want to do before bed, right? Like that kind
Jeez.
of stuff. Um, but I mean, yeah, I'm drawn to those subjects, so I'm excited about that. It's a lot like a learning about human psychology and culture and society, and
Yeah.
also recognizing a lot of this stuff wasn't that long ago. Like, they were calling Muslims and people of color backwards or whatever, undeveloped. But yeah, only
Mhm.
90 years ago, like, these fascist dictators were running wild everywhere, right? So
Yeah.
really trying to understand that, I guess, like the darker parts of our past that for a long time white people, all white people actually, like, it was only white people who wrote the history and they kept suppressed for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's not like I'm not trying to accuse anybody of anything today. I think when we talk about race, sometimes people can be made to feel uncomfortable, which perhaps sometimes they should. But this second, what I'm researching is really about bringing the facts to light and bringing it all together.
Yeah.
So
Well, you
yeah.
listen. I don't want to end it off here, but you just triggered something. I'm gonna, I guess, ask your permission. I think it's in your book or maybe on your blog where you talk about racism isn't just a feeling. And it was fascinating. This one paragraph that you wrote where you talk about what happens to your body and
Yeah.
that people who face racism actually die earlier. You know,
Yeah.
that's just and so my question to you is, I want to type that out and throw it on my Instagram because that I found it. Oh my God, this is
Yeah.
you know.
It's true. Yeah. I would appreciate that because that's not that well known, because we think of racism as hurt feelings, right? But a lot
Yeah,
of the research shows that when you continually face slights and racially based, because you can't change anything about that, when you continually face that and you face heightened levels of cortisol and stress, your cells begin to age faster as a response. So, in fact, people who are often very gifted from underserved communities end up having worse health outcomes than people who just stayed in the community, right? And why is that? Because they've had to exert an enormous amount of
oh
effort
wow,
at a cellular level, at a stress level, to overcompensate for the ideologies of white supremacy and racism. And that actually depletes even the more privilege they get. People like me, we can go to Harvard, Yale, we can do all this thing, but our cells age faster, frankly, and it has negative impact on health outcomes, which, if you're already brown or black, the health outcomes are already
yeah,
worse. The treatment in hospitals is already worse. So I would appreciate that, Kareem, because
yeah,
I think as much as we talk about race, like, and racism, let's get down into the material, actual consequences of
mm,
people, in their body and in their societies. So
yeah. Omar, listen, I wish you the best of health.
thank you.
Um,
Same.
and thank you. And listen, congrats on the book. Uh, Amazing. And the book is Brown Boy, a memoir by Omer Aziz, published by our friends at Scribner, and it's available April 4th in your favorite bookstore. Go walk into your local bookstore, pick one up, and you'll also be able to find it online as well, wherever books are sold. Omer, thank you so much for your time. Listen,
Thank you.
next time you're in your old neighborhood, drop me a line on Instagram. Maybe we'll go to the old China Cottage.
I would love to. I would love to. And the Karachi Bazaar.
Yes, that's the name. That's the place you mentioned in your book, I believe.
That's
Karachi
right.
Bazaar.
That's right.
That's in your book.
By the way, the new Karachi Bazaar is closed. The old Karachi Bazaar now has a for rent sign on. It's an end of an era,
Yes.
unfortunately, but maybe I will one day open a Karachi Bazaar in
There you go.
Scarborough, and maybe that's what this will amount to. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. April 4th, Brown Boy comes out, and yeah, I really hope your listeners, read it, buy it. I think it was written for us and for our people. So
Yeah.
let's get it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Have the amazing weekend.
Cheers. You too. Bye.
Bye now.